got very good arms.
He didn't fall? Inconceivable.
You keep using the word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and I've got a special video here for you today. So earlier in the week, I got together with Joe, who's become kind of the de facto comic book historian here on the channel, likes to talk about old stuff, the history of comic books, a lot of creators and things of that nature. I reached out. I got Gevian Dargan, who used to be an intern at Milestone, came back as an editor, and I also was very fortunate that Jason Medley, who also worked at Milestone as an artist, he's worked at several publishers throughout the industry, decided to join us. Well, it's the larger conversation is kind of like the history of Black comic book creators and characters, kind of like that. But I knew once they started talking about like the Milestone era that we were going to get some good stories, and that's what this video is. If you are interested in the entire conversation, which is well over an hour, that is up right now on my podcast channel. It's Thinking Critical Comic Book Podcast. It's on iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Just search Thinking Critical Comics and you will find it. And this video is live. There's also a banner down below that kind of will give you some information on the podcast and where it's available. So if you want the entire conversation, that's where it is. Definitely, if you enjoy this, please share it, whether it's on the podcast or here on the YouTube channel. I think this was a wonderful conversation. I'm hoping to get Jason to come back and have some more conversations because we had such a good time. But this is basically the Gevian and Jason show where they're talking, going down memory lane, talking about stories with Milestone, some Dwayne McDuffie stories, things of that nature. And I just thought it was fantastic. And I hope you all enjoy it as much as I enjoyed having the conversation. We'll start with you, Jason. What did Milestone mean to you at the time? How was it different, and what got you excited about it?
It was a job.
Buddy.
No, so I met Michael Davis. I was, he had his Thursday class. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Thursday class. If you heard tales about it, Joe, you probably heard stuff about it. So, I got introduced, you could only come into the Thursday class if somebody that was in the Thursday class brought you in. So if you had a friend that brought you in and you were weak, A, you couldn't stay, and B, they would just kill your friend who would stay for the rest of his duration with the class. So like if you were inviting somebody in, they had to be strong. So thank God my friend thought I was strong enough to be in the Thursday class.
When you say strong, do you mean like a good writer, or do you just mean like strong will, can take a little bit of heat, can take
good
criticism?
artistically? Well, you got to be able, if you're an artist up until that point, like you're good with taking criticism, like, just going through art school, that's all it is criticism. Like you throw your piece on the wall and then everybody gets to have at it. But like you have to be strong with your art. Like to Davis's credit, to Mike's credit, like he's not stuck to a single style. Like he sees quality. He finds the best out of everybody's look. Some guys are a little more abstract than others, but he gets it. He understands it. So, you always had a fair shake in the Thursday class. But I was in junior college. I was upstate. Most of the time they would get together and I come back down and, I catch up a little and whatever. But what I was doing upstate was way different from what everybody else was doing. Everybody was concentrated on comic art, and they didn't have that in the college I was at. They just had a general commercial arts class. So I was getting a lot stronger with my production, and that's old school production. That's like cutting and pasting before Quark, before Photoshop, before Illustrator. Like you had to sit down, you had to draw out the logo, you had to take it into the film room, stat it, develop the stat, rubber cement that whole thing. That was the education I was getting, which was, again, nobody else was specializing in that. So I came back and I had a specific niche, which is what got me into Milestone, because they needed production people. I knew my stuff. Mike was confident in me. he got me into Milestones. So like now, I have a job which makes mom and dad happy. Like, they gotta support me. But I'm in the comic industry. Like I'm literally in the comic industry. DC was over I think they were on 33rd, 53rd at the time, I forget. And then Milestone was down over in the 23rd. So like we were part of DC family, but we were also our own thing. And you're in the middle of it, and it's like, this seems historical, but you can't really see the forest for the trees sometimes until you like leave the forest, and it's like, damn, I was really in the middle of something. Like you kind of had, at least for me, like you kind of had the sense like this is big, but like you're trying to make sure you hit your deadlines. Like while I was there, and Jason corrected me, but while I was there, Milestone books were never late. Like every month, every week, if there was a book was supposed to be out, it was there, it was in the stores. Now, it may not have been a legit part 2 to the Mothership Connection, like it might have been an interlude story, but there was always an Icon book on the stand. There was always a hardware book on the stand, Static, Blood Syndicate, didn't matter, it was always on the stands. And then Jason told me that, we were always on time up until I think Static 25. And at that point I wasn't there. So I don't, I can't be responsible for that. But I mean, it was so much going on, and we were all excited and we were all young. Like it was a good mix of like veterans and rookies. Like, just like with any other championship, like sports team, like you got to have that good mix, and you have to have good leadership, good locker room guys. Dwayne was definitely the best locker room guy. Like I rubbed him the wrong way when I first got there, but after the fact, if I called up Dwayne, he would take my call, and B, he would give me like solid good advice, good advice, especially when it came to my writing. Yeah, like it was so. So it
felt special in the moment, and you were getting mentorship from like a craftsman like Dwayne McDuffie.
Yeah. I mean, Dwayne just kept that place humming. Like being an editor, when he was an editor at Marvel and everything, he knew how to make sure a great many of the bases were covered. Like, we had inventory stories, which allowed us to always keep a monthly schedule and always be on time. He wasn't handcuffed to just, we got to get the best and the brightest. Like the best thing about Milestone was just how much new talent they broke.
Absolutely. I got a list. It's pretty crazy. Obviously this is an all-inclusive, but some of the names that come out of here: John Paul Leon, Christopher Sotomayor, Chris Cross, Sean Martinborough, Tommy Lee Edwards, J. Scott J, Prentice Rollins, J.H. Williams III, Humberto Ramos, John Rossum, Eric Battle, Joseph Village, Madeline Blostein, Jamal Eigel, Chris Bautista.
Yep.
Pretty crazy.
I think it's important to add to this as well that Milestone Media helped more than it wasn't just this is a black imprint for black creators and black fans. They brought in so many incredibly talented people, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but having talked to other people that worked at Milestone, there wasn't any like background checks. There were plenty of people at the time that people didn't like know who the hell they were. They just got the stuff in the mail and were just like, all right, we'll print it, like that kind of stuff.
That's how Chris Cross got his gig.
Yeah,
that's right. You want to tell the story, or should I? That's my favorite story.
You enhance it because there's holes in my telling of it. But like,
hold on. So my understanding as a newbie coming in towards the middle of it was that he just basically showed up every day at the front door and just would wait for them to come downstairs. He basically he would not go away until basically they looked at his stuff.
He showed up one day. outside of Gevian, Joe, have you guys ever like physically been in the same room with Chris Cross?
I've not physically been in the same room.
Right.
Okay, so Chris is 6'9".
Yep.
You can't miss it.
Yeah, and at the time, like Chris looked like he could start for the Knicks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So somebody told him, you know, he did like a couple of stories for an independent comic book company. I don't remember which one. But somebody told him about Milestone starting up and everything. And he was like, what's a Milestone? It's like, they filled him in. He found out they were on he found out where the address was on 23rd Street. He rolled up to the office in the waiting room, and like the way everything was put together, like there was just it was a cubicle divider separating the waiting room and the rest of the offices.
Yep.
Now, he's 6'9", he's athletic, he's a go-getter. Like nothing was gonna stop Chris. Like if he wanted to wild out, he could have kicked over that divider and just been like, yo, somebody need to come out here and talk to me. Stop, you know, excuse my French, stop dicking me around. Like I'm here, come on, give me a job. Like if he wanted to be crazy, nobody could stop him. But he showed up and he was like, I'm here, I'm good, I got my portfolio, somebody need to give me a job. So somebody went around the thing, talked to somebody, Dwayne came out, peeked around, and Dwayne's like 6'6", 6'7".
Mm-hmm.
He's not a small dude. And Dwayne knows how to handle himself. Like Dwayne's a teddy bear, you know, he's a science guy. Dwayne was ready to, when push came to shove, Dwayne was going to scrap. Like, so he came around, peeked around, went back. There was a lot of talking, a lot of moving around. Eventually, you know, they invited him back. And I remember Dwayne was telling the story to some interns, I think, or Chris was in the building, and they were just like, you know, chit-chatting. It's like, oh, I remember when you first came over, blah, blah. And Dwayne was like, I'm gonna go out there, I'm gonna handle him. He came around the corner and saw him. He was like, yeah, I can't handle him.
I got this.
But I mean, you know, Chris came up and he was like, I'm here, give me a job. And they're like, all right, here's a couple of trading cards and cover, or he did like issue 3 or issue 4 of Blood Syndicate. And then he got Blood Syndicate regularly with like 6 or 7 or something. You have to forgive me, it's been like almost 30 years. But I mean, you know, you're not, all that to say is, yes, Joe, you're not lying.
And to add to that, by the time I got to Milestone, they had a legit doing walls up at that point. So
I got a quick question, Gevian. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take over.
Go ahead.
So when Milestone was like 92, 93, where were you in your life when like you?
So I was in college at that point. And so basically we had heard about the announcements from Milestone. So I want to say, because I know when I saw the classified that they put out for the internships, I know it was Icon 2, it was Payback. It was the frog looking guy. That had hit the stands because I bought that comic from when I was up in the Bronx, and I picked it up because I didn't want to, I wanted to buy it legit off the newsstand. I was kind of like, I've been burned by black-owned comic books before. Where it's like, okay, there's a black guy, but the quality wasn't that great. So I said, I'm going to do it the legit way, walk into my newsstand and get it. I picked it up, and I was like, Mark Wright was always a favorite of mine before that. My favorite, everybody says, oh, yeah, you're going to bring it up. Yeah, West Coast Avengers Annual #2 with Wright and Isherwood. That was, to me, that was one of the best things he did. I think I've heard through the grapevine he wasn't happy with the inking, but I'll leave that to another day. But when I picked it up, I was like, okay, this is legit. Like, this is not because it's a black company, not because it's black characters. this is straight up a good story, and I would buy this again. So when I was reading the letters page, because they had letters pages back then, so that shows how old I am. Letters page back then, they had all the advertisement for for the intern program. So I called it like the next day. So I'm trying to think. I want to say that was probably. I want to say it's probably if I think it had to be 91. It had to be 91, 92. I don't think I was a sophomore just yet in college, but I think it was 91, 92. And then, and so I called and they were like, yeah, come on down. And I was pretty much just like, yeah, whatever you guys want me to do. I knew I was interested in writing. So, and got into the editorial program. But it's definitely a lot of what you've been saying, Jason. It was a good mix of veterans and new people and newbies, rookies. And it was just a real good learning environment. Like one of the people I always hold up is Erica Helene. I mean, she was just somebody, she just really knew her stuff. Like what I always remember is like sometimes we'd be hanging out in the area, like kind of the common area, and just like shooting the breeze and talking about just the industry. And she was one who started talking about why people one hit wonders and they couldn't get a second thing around. She was like, because they had no idea, they had no craft and no idea about how they made the first thing successful. So that always stuck with me because I was just like, I don't want to be a one hit wonder. I want to be able to do this all over again. So that meant to me, I needed to know why something was working in the first place. I needed to understand why I was telling the story, why the story worked, why the characters worked, why it worked in the business, because it was like some people you have, it's like they spend like 20 years getting their stuff together before their first thing comes out. So when it comes out, it's like, yeah, it's good because you have 20 years built up of you working a thing, working out, this and that. But then once you start getting into the business of it, where it's like, oh, now you got to hit a deadline and all that. If you just really you don't have the discipline down, or you just winging it or whatever it is, you get exposed real quick. So it's just like when you're dealing with people like that on a regular basis, you just can't help but be good. So the one thing what I was doing at Milestone all the time is like guys were coming with stuff all the time. Joe Illich in particular would give me his notes from Denny O'Neill's writing class. I would make copies of that. But when I was doing my duties around the office, if I saw stuff in the office, I was like, quick copies, stick them someplace, make sure to smuggle them out. Because this was like comic publishing gold. So the funny thing with the Jim Owsley piece was he was writing this thing about basically how to deal with talent. So he said it was one story he told in the book in the little manual where he said that he got a call from this really famous artist. He was like so excited to get the phone call. He's like, he loved this guy, this and that, and he couldn't wait to take his call. He's like, how can I help you? And he was like, look, on page 15 in this panel right here, the rocket here, it's a solid color. There should be stripes on it. He says, you know what? I'm gonna get right on that and get it changed. And then he changed his phone number after that. Listen, it was like that was the wealth of information and the wealth of how to deal with people you were getting out of there. I mean, honestly, it's like when Dwayne had passed, and I think they had released the Justice League Doom animated film from DC. And they had done the documentary, which was basically a tribute to Dwayne at that point. And I think I just moved to Chicago, and I was watching it. We were in our old apartment, so I was watching on TV. And my wife looks over to me because she realized I was tearing up and kind of a little bit of sobbing a bit. And she was like, "Are you okay?" And it's like, I was like, that guy, that dude, and so many people at Milestone, they literally have taught me everything I know about comics, and in some cases, I would need to know about comics. It was like when you talk about standing on the shoulders of people, that's what you're talking about. It's like Dwayne is always going to exist in some way, all of those guys, because we carry so much of ourselves, so much of them in ourselves, and the way we conduct ourselves professionally, and the way we even live our lives as men and women. It's a lot of that has come from what they taught us and what the expectations were. They set high expectations. So, it's like, yeah, when we talk about that in Image, like with Image, my thing is always like, I'm always mad at them because I'm like, dude, with a head of steam like that, how could you have possibly failed? But, and I appreciate the observation stuff because it's like, it was a different environment. With Milestone, there was some controversy about sometimes how focused they may have all been, but I think in a lot of ways, we all realized we were on what team we were on and what we were trying to accomplish. And And I think by the time I came into it, like Jason was talking about, you can't see the forest for the trees. By the time I came into it, I knew how historic it was. I don't think I appreciated as much being a part of it as I did at the time. But it was like, yeah, that it was a big freaking deal. It was a big freaking deal. And the other thing is that, and I'll say this last piece, it's like the books were sometimes when we talk on comic aficionados at times, and some of the times, you know, you get in the comments thing, BLM propaganda, SJW this, SJW that. Nah, my friends, Milestone Comics at the time, there was a time when people had said that Blood Syndicate was the best team book out there, hands down, in terms of characterization, in terms of plotting, in terms of the art with the Stella Crisscross, the writing from Ivan Velez Jr., who was one of the most underrated team book writers out there. It was quality stuff. It stood up against anything else, not because it was black, not because it had a gimmick, not because it was a niche, because it was coming from a legacy of guys who have been in the business for decades and knew their stuff, and a bunch of young people who basically were just as talented and took to it like water. So
you have a career outside of comic books has been very successful, but you still have a passion for comic books, and it's Sheriff Wright, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You want to let the viewers in on what Sheriff Wright is and where they can find it? And there'll definitely be a link to anywhere that he gives me in the description.
So Sheriff Wright is title character is Marva Wright. She's an escaped slave. And the whole book takes place during the Reconstruction era in Arkansas. And she's freelance. She's a freelance tracker, and she's helping a posse go after a bunch of bank robbers that, you know, obviously they just robbed the local bank in town, and everybody gets, you know, the posse gets ambushed, everybody's slaughtered, and Marva's the last survivor. Because all of the deputized law enforcement are now dead except her, she is the de facto sheriff. And now she's the sheriff of this town, you know, just coming out of the Civil War, the post-Civil War, and just all the drama and conflict and difficulties that a Black woman at that time that it brings about, that, you know, all of that happens from that. You can find it at the website urbanlegendsmedia.com. Like I said, issue 2 just went out to the printer. There should be another 4 weeks before I get the physical issues. And the physical issue and the digital issue both street at the same time, April 21st, April 22nd.